Thank you very much for joining me again this afternoon for Inspiration Wednesday. My name is Daryl Fleary with Trivantis. Today we're going to talk about creating drag and drop and matching questions. And the reason we're picking these two to go together is that they have similar properties and share similar scoring models, which we'll talk about as we go through the session today. Drag and drop and matching are two of Lectora's 9 gradable question types. And I'm really excited to talk about these questions today because with the new question creator in version 11, as I'm sure most of you know, entering questions is so much easier than it used to be. And in particular with drag and drop and matching, we've made some improvements that really will help out quite a bit. If you haven't played with it already, I'm sure you'll be interested in seeing that here today. What I typically do as I do these sessions is I like to begin with a few examples so you can remember where we're going. And then we'll go through and look at the properties for matching questions and for drag and drop questions, talk about some of the new things and unique things to those questions. And then we'll go into some more advanced or creative examples and take a look at those. And then we'll go into Lectora and actually look at the AWT file to make sure you're clear on how they are set up. I see a question already in the chat that says, do drag and drops work on iPad? Yes, they do work on iPad. If you have the latest version of Lectora, they should work fine for you on the iPad. I will say this, by the way, as long as we're in that quick update mode, matching questions and drag and drop questions are not accessibility compliant. They are not 508 compliant. So keep that in mind, and I'll point that out later as we go back into Lectora. Okay, so let's take a look at an example just to get started here. This is a sort of a basic matching question. This example actually comes from our Let's Cook sample title, which is out on our website. If you go to lectora.com, go to the Lectora U page, and then select sample titles, there are a bunch of titles out there that you can view and in many cases download, and Let's Cook is one of them. I always mention that title because in that Let's Cook title, we use just about everything that you can do in Lectora in that title, so it's a great place to go and look and see how some different things were done. So anyway, here's a basic matching question, and when a student takes a matching question, they select the item on the left that they want to match and they pick a corresponding thing on the right, or vice versa, pick something on the right and a corresponding thing on the left. And you'll see that Lectora draws these nice lines between the objects, which is really a nice visual improvement over, the old school A1, B2, C3 kind of thing. You can see here we did a little bit of feedback. In this case, we just used the character pose. We're not going to talk about feedback here today, but remember, feedback can be pretty much anything you want to do. So that's all. The student just goes through and makes their selections. With matching questions, you can have all images, as we do in this case. You can have all text, such as words on the left and phrases on the right. You can have a combination of text and images. You can have pretty much anything that you want. In this case, this question also has an equal number of left items and right items, but you can also have distractors as well, which are really good to reduce guessing and improve the reliability of your questions. And we'll look at some examples today that include distractors. Let's look at a drag and drop question. In this particular case, the student drags an image onto the diagram, and in this case, we're giving them immediate feedback. And if they get it right, we can get that as well. Now, I want to point out here, that's one thing that's interesting with this, is you'll notice there are more drag items than there are drop points. In this case, there's only one drop point, and we have 3 distractor drag items in addition to the actual correct drag item. So we'll look at that as well and talk about how that gets set up. A distractor in drag and drop questions is a drag item that should not be moved or a drop zone where nothing should be placed. And as I say, we'll look at some of those later on today. Now, for those of you that are used to version X of Lectora, one of the great things about version 11 is that we now support what we call sort of bucket type scenarios, where you can have many drag items that go to a single drop point, so sort of that many to one scenario. And we also support one-to-many in version 11, meaning something can be counted as correct in multiple places. So those are nice improvements, and we'll talk about those a little bit as we go. Now, to select a matching question or a drag and drop question, you go to the Test and Survey ribbon, and on the Test and Survey ribbon, you simply select, in this case, matching question. When you do, it will bring up the question creator for matching. And just a quick side note here, one of the cool things in version 11 is that with any of the question types, there is a default set of information, sort of a placeholder set of information that's always available on the dialog. And the reason for that is if you want to build out your title and know you need an interaction or a question and just don't know what you want to use yet, all you have to do is choose your question type, click OK, and there's a fully functioning workable question right there on your page ready to go, and then you can just edit it and change the information later. So anyway, we're going to pick a matching question, and we're going to go ahead and sort of show you how we built out this one that we just looked at with the pot and the meatballs and the turkey and so forth. Now, the first thing you'll do when you get to a matching question is you're probably going to either rename the question or rename the variable. That hasn't changed from version X. If you want to do those so you can spot them better and make them easier to find, that's up to you. As well as changing point values or grading individual choices, etc. Typically, though, most people come in and the first thing they do is complete the question text. What's the text of their question? And then if you want to have an image with the question, you can do that as well. With this particular question, we used a character pose. I just want to take a moment and point out that if you want to use a character pose and actually affect a change to it, like we did with the feedback, then you cannot select it here from the image. Selecting here just pulls a static image in. You would want to select the character pose from the media library. But otherwise, you just pick an image if you want an image or not. Another thing that's new to version 11 is that you can select the line color that you want for matching. In previous versions, it defaulted, and now you can pick the color that you want so it looks nice with your title. You can also change the weight of that line to make it thicker or thinner if you'd like. Okay, so here's our basic question table, though. This is the main part of the matching question. And you can see that you can have left column items and right column items, left column images, right column images, or any combination of those two things. The first thing I want to point out with matching questions is to keep in mind that because something has to match to something else, we enter matching question in pairs. So as you select a row, it'll highlight the whole row so that you know you're working with both the left item thing and the right item thing and what they match with. So if you recall in the question we were just creating, we didn't have any text, we just had images. So I would select the first line and I would take out the text for the first line. And then I would click here and pick the image that I want. In this case, it's the pot. And then its corresponding or correct match was that spaghetti. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the text over here and pick the spaghetti over here as well. Again, you can pick from images that are already in your title, or you can import images, same as you always do. So once you've decided what you want for your match, in this case 2 images, you just go on and do the same thing on the second line and on the third line. Obviously, I'm shortcutting here. Now, we had an equal number of left column items and right column items in that question, but if you wanted to add distractors, you could put in distractor text or distractor images, as many as you want, and just indicate whether they're on the left or the right. For this particular question, we didn't need any distractors, so we'll just go ahead and get rid of that. So again, as you select a line, it highlights the entire line so that you know you're working with a matching pair. Now, if you were observant, many of you probably noticed this down here, this selected pair. And notice as I change lines, that value changes. What that's doing, and I'm just going to hover over here so you can see it, the test results for matching questions is equal to the left item name, a dash, and the right item name. in previous versions of Lectora, your test results for matching always showed 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, meaning this with this, this with this, and this with this. That wasn't very meaningful or helpful to students on tests. So what we've done in version 11 is we've added this name column. So you'll notice as I pick a line, what it's really picking up is whatever's in the name column. So now in version 11, you can rename these items so that you can have meaningful test results. So for example, I'm going to name this one pot, and I'll name this one spaghetti, and skillet, and meatballs, and roasting pan, and turkey. So now as I change lines, you can see that what Lectora is going to be recognizing as the question answer is roasting pan dash turkey, skillet dash meatballs, pot dash spaghetti, or however the student actually picks it, right? Pot to meatballs, etc. So now the results will say your answer was pot meatballs. The correct answer is pot spaghetti. This is really important because it does a couple of things. As I said, it makes your test results easier to understand for your students. It also reduces the amount of storage in the variables. In previous versions of Lectora, we stored all of the text from your items as the answer in the variable, and that would fill up the variable cookie a little bit quickly. Now we're only storing the name that you put in, and that will help in that respect quite a bit. And then the other thing it does, it allows you, since you know what Lectora is looking at in the results, you can then do a lot of different things based on that. For example, if you wanted to show an image of a meatball, if every time they chose meatball, you could do that because you could look in the results and say, if question 1 contains meatball, flash a meatball on the screen, or things of that nature. So there are a number of different things you can do. I noticed one of the questions in the chat says, is there a max number of matching items? And the answer to that is not that I have found. As far as I know, it's an unlimited number of matching items. And if it's not unlimited, it's probably more than you probably want on a page anyway. Okay, so that's how matching works. Again, you want to always name your left column items and your right column items. You could have text, images, or any combination of the two. And feel free to add an image with your question if you want. If you want distractors, add as many as you like. Just indicate whether they're left column distractors or right column distractors. What I want to do now then is talk a little bit about drag and drop because it's similar. And again, to select a drag and drop, you go to the Test and Survey ribbon, choose your question drop down, and select drag and drop. And again, we're going to put a default one on the page for you to begin working with. Images are required for drag and drop questions. You must have a drop image. Okay, so that's the first thing. We will put a default one in there, but you don't have to use the default. You can select any image that you want in your title or import a different image if you'd like. Okay, same things at the top, nothing different there. Put in your question text and so on. What we've done with drag and drop in version 11 is we have separated drag items from drop zones. So no longer must you have an equal number of drop zones to your drag items. You could have as many drag items as you like. You could have as many drop zones as you like. And for each drag item, you can then say which drop zones, if any, should that drag item go to. So obviously, if you have a drag item that does not have a drop zone associated with it, then that must be a distractor drag item. In other words, a drag item that should not be moved. And in this case, we had 3 of those, right? All 3 of these drag items, these 3 compass directional things, should not be moved. There was only one that should go to the drop zone. Also true with drag and drop questions, as it was for matching, you can name your drag items or name your drop zones. So again, you can have meaningful test results. It will no longer show 112233, it'll show, in this case, southwest northeast went to drop zone 1, or east southwest north went to drop zone 1. In fact, we could rename that too and say, I don't know, direction or something like that. Okay? So that's how that works. You can have multiple drag items, multiple drop zones, and indicate whether for each drag item, which, if any, drop zones it should be allowed to go to. Another thing that we changed in version 11 is you no longer have to have items snapped to the center of the drop zone. In previous versions, they automatically snapped. Now they don't. So that if you have a large area, let's say a bucket, and you want to put lots of things in the bucket, they won't cover each other up if you turn off snap to center. They'll lay wherever you put them. And there's a good example of that, by the way, in the Let's Cook title with a question about perishability of foods. Let me hop over there. Actually, I'll just show you that now. So we had this question there where people have to drag these text items into a category of perishable or non-perishable. So we have two giant drop zones in this case, one that we named P for perishable, one that we named NP for non-perishable, so that our test results will show baby food went to P or baby food went to NP. So you can tell what the student did versus what was the correct answer. So in this case, baby food jars goes to non-perishable. Bottled water goes to non-perishable. Bread should go to perishable. Canned soup should go to non-perishable. So a number of different things can go into these buckets, and we turned off snap to center so that wherever the student puts them, they'll just stay there. Again, don't forget you have to have an image with the drag and drop question. If this is hard to work with, you can use this expander here, and that will show you a larger view where you can then adjust the size of your drop zones numerically or with fine single pixel clicking. And the same is true with drag and drop as it was with matching, that your test results are going to equal the item name dash the drop zone name. So this is what will show up on the test results, and this is what will show up on the test results. By the way, I'm also going to mention hotspot question here. Hotspot works more like a multiple choice, but I want to point out that with hotspot questions, you also have to have an image. You also have access to that expanded viewer, and you can also name your hotspot questions. So those are similar in nature to matching and drag and drop, that you can name your hotspots and that you can have to have an image here. Okay, so that's how drag and drop and matching work. Okay, with matching, you have items on the left, items on the right. They can be text or images. With drag and drop, you have text or images on the left and drop zones that you lay on top of your required image. So let me give you a couple more tips here. Oh, I'm sorry, before I finish that, let me just point out this show drop zone outlines. I'll talk about that in just a second. And if you do show them, then you have the ability to color them. What that means is, in this case, we had this nice diagram. Let me make it a little bit bigger, where they could see that they're dragging everything that's perishable within this area and everything non-perishable within this area. So our image showed them where they needed to drop things. If you think about this example, we had this intersection here on the diagram. So that sort of showed them where they needed to drop things. So you always want to tell your student or show your student where the available drop areas are. In previous versions of Lectora, you had to embed that in your picture. In version 11, you no longer have to include that as part of your image. You can just simply say, I want to show the drop zones I've defined. And I'll show you that right now. So here's some design tips for doing these questions. When you're doing matching questions, the first thing you want to think about is make sure that you choose match color lines that contrast well against your page background. Now, as always, it's best to use a constant color background, not shaded or marbled, because it's very difficult for a student to read a question on top of a gradiated or shaded background. But then also make sure you pick a nice, solid, contrasting color that goes nicely against it, and adjust the weight of that line so it looks nice. Another helpful tip is to create all of your drag images and drop images before you build your drag and drop questions. So make sure you have all your assets ready to go. It makes it a lot faster when you're ready to build the question. And as I mentioned, you want to use an indicator to make it clear where the possible drop points are located. Here's another example where, in this case, I did not build an indicator into my diagram. All I did was check that checkbox that says to show the drop zones. So now the student can tell where everything can be dropped, and they don't have to guess on this diagram what's possible to go where. You can see all the little places on the diagram that it's supposed to go. I did not have to build that into my diagram. I simply checked the checkbox that's right here that says to show the drop zones, and then picked a color that I liked. Another tip, and we've talked about this a little bit already, is it's really helpful to name your left column items or drag items and your right column items or drop zones. Again, that's for test result purposes, but also, as you'll see in a moment, you can use that to do some very interesting things. And then finally, I encourage you to think like a student. And what that means when I say think like a student is to anticipate where they will drag things. So let me show you what I mean by that. Here's another example. And in this example, the student is supposed to take this text and drag it into the fact or fiction column. Well, you can tell from the way our diagram is organized, you can see the drop points. Okay, that was part of our image. And you can see these nice little lines here, so the student knows, okay, this one goes across to here or over to here. But when I say think like a student, I mean keep in mind that if this is fact, for example, it can go anywhere in the fact column and could still be correct. So they might test you and say, well, if I put this here, and I put this up here, and I put this one down here, will it still score correctly? And of course you can do that because in Lectora you can define what are the acceptable correct drop points. So if I do this, I still get the question right. And the reason for that is I told Lectora that this item is correct in this drop zone, or this drop zone, or this one, this one, this one. And all of these items are correct in any of these drop zones over here on the right. Now you'll also notice I've got some other information popping up here. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Actually, you know what, I'll talk about it now. Let me tell you what I did here. I'm just going to reset this question. Notice if I click on these, nothing happens. And if I come over here and I click submit, you'll see that it knows that I've not placed all my statements. And I can continue to do that, and it knows that everything's not someplace. Once I have everything someplace, now it gives me different feedback and can tell me that's not correct. And if I move things around where I want, now I can get correct feedback. And also notice that now, as I click these, I can get more information. Well, here's why this naming of your left column items and your right column items is important. Let me show you what Lectora is seeing right now. Lectora is seeing the name for this first item, which I called the cost of feeding ... is in the Fact 1 drop zone. That's what I called this first drop zone. Fact 1, Fact 2, Fact 3, Fact 4, Fact 5, and Fiction 1 through 5. It is seeing this item, the administrator at the facility ... is in the Fiction 2 drop zone. If I move things around a little bit, you can see now it's a little bit different. It's seeing that product quality is not important. Again, this is the name that I gave that pile of text, is in the Fact 4 drop zone. So all I had to do when I built this question was, knowing what Lectora is going to be looking for in the question variable, I could tell Lectora, do not allow any of these click-on things to work until all of them are somewhere, until my question results contain all of them in some location. Right or wrong, I didn't care in this particular case, But as long as there was something in all of these places, each of these was listed, then I allowed the click to work. Otherwise, I didn't. So let me just circle back and just do that one more time so you can see. None of the clicks are working. As I move things onto the diagram, they're still not working. Only after I move everything in do I change the value of my variable that now says allow those things to work. So you can do some pretty creative things if you know what Lectora is looking for. Let's take a look at a matching question that also has distractors. Obviously, this one was 5 drag items and lots of drop point distractors. This matching question here is 5 items on the left and only 4 things on the right. So we have some left column distractors here. Same type of thing though. The student will just select the things they need to pick and get scored. Okay, that's incorrect. Let's do it again. Let's say this goes up here and chef goes here. Let's try that. Great, we got that right. And you can see the test results, what Lectora is looking for. It's seeing the name I gave this text object was administrator. It's seeing administrator dash like CEO. So the name for the right column item that I gave this information was like a CEO. Again, left item name dash right item name. Left item name dash right item name. Chef dash in charge of the kitchen. Registered dietitian dash administrative capacity. And that's how you can now have very meaningful test results for your students. All right, so now that we've looked at some of the basic examples, what I want to do is go a little further afield and talk about, now that we know what's in that variable, what are some of the other things we can do, and what are some of the other ways we can use, for example, drag and drop questions to have a more interesting title. And the first one I'm going to show you is really, really very simple. Basically, it's just a multiple choice question, but instead of using multiple choice, where they click one of 4 radio buttons, I built it out as a drag and drop question. So my left item, my drag item, is here, and then they can just move it to the appropriate island and click submit. Easy enough. My islands are just drop zones. So wherever they drop the ship, that's a drop zone. And all I did was set up drop zones here, here, in between as well, because they can just drop it anywhere along this path. So it's a little bit more interesting way of doing a multiple choice question. Let me just show you what the test results are showing right now. So right now the test results are showing my drag item, which I named cruise, is in the 50 to 90 miles drop zone. This is the name of the drop zone that I created that's between 50 and 90. If I move it over to here, you can see that Lectora is seeing that cruise is in the 25-mile drop zone. So again, they're just a bunch of drop zones, and wherever they move the cruise ship to, we can evaluate that. Not too complicated there. It's just basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 drop zones, and the only one that's correct is this one. All right, here's another example that I wanted to show you. This is using a drag and drop question, but not using it as a question at all. We're using it as an interactive way to help with our instruction. This, by the way, as you can probably tell from the cookware, is also in that Let's Cook title that I mentioned earlier. So all the student does here is they drag something onto the tabletop and it shows some information. They drag another thing onto the tabletop and it shows that information. Well, let me just show you again what Lectora is seeing. Our tabletop is our one drop zone that we called table. And then each of these items is a drag item. Bowl, roasting pan, pot, baking sheet, wok, and skillet. And as they drag these onto the table, Lectora is seeing, in this case, that walk is on the table. And we just wrote feedback that says run an action group, and the action group has, I think, 6 actions in it, and it says if my results have walk on the table, show that text. If it has skillet dash table, show a different piece of text. If it has pot dash table, show a different piece of text. And that's all that's used for. So it's using a drag and drop question, not as a question as all, but as an interactive instructional piece. Let's look at another example.
To automatically enter check data, scan the check in the microreader. Drag the check to the microreader now to scan it.
In this case, we were teaching a teller system, and instead of just teaching, the actual keystrokes and everything else, we wanted to model all the behavior that the teller needed to do, which was taking cash from the customer, scanning the check, putting the check in the right sorting bin, all those sorts of things, so they could see the full range of activities, not just what keystrokes to do in the computer. So here the teller has to drag the check, a drag item, into the microreader. So let's say I drag it over here. I get feedback that says, nope, I didn't drag it to the microreader. Obviously, what Lectora is seeing is that I dragged my item called check into the drop zone called monitor. Left item name, right item name, or in this case, drag item dash drop zone. If they drag the check over here, we say, nope, that's not correct. Obviously, they drag the check to the customer. And if they drag it to the correct place, then we do feedback for that, which in this case was to run a tiny little video so it looked like they were scanning the check. So again, using drag and drop for some more creative approaches than just as a question, in this case more of a simulation. And let me show you one final example before we go into Lectora itself. This is a lot more complicated example. The idea here is that the student has to put the appropriate things in the appropriate basket. But you'll notice that the baskets are not pre-labeled. So if I put the egg label here, and the tomato here, and the cantaloupe over here, now you notice this uses that many to one scenario, right? I can put all 4 of these items in the same drop zone. And you'll see that that's correct. But if I do something as simple as this, now it's not correct. Okay? Well, how did we do that? Well, let me show you what Lectora is seeing. What we did was we set up 6 drop zones, 1 for each label, 1, 2, and 3 for each label, and 4, 5, and 6 for each basket. So all we had to do is look and see where did they put each label, and based on where they put each label, were these things in the correct drop zone. I'll show you what the results look like for that. I used numbers for this. If I were actually going to use this on a test, I would probably rename them. But I know that, actually, you know what, let me do this. Let me just reset it just so you can see it a little bit better. So this is drag item number 1, number 2, number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And then we have drop zones 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So if I move my eggs here, that means Lectora is seeing drag item number 1, or named number 1, in drop zone number 2. Drag item 1 is in drop zone 2. Item name dash drop zone. If I put cantaloupe over here, it's seeing drag item number 3 in drop zone number 1. 3 is in 1. Again, if I want to be meaningful to my students, I would rename these. So this just goes on, and then the same thing. Once I know where these things are supposed to go, I then just say, okay, if my egg label is here, then all of my eggs need to be in drop zone number 5. All of my tomatoes have to be in number 6. And that's how the results look. So the point wasn't to show you this. This looks a little bit confusing. But the point is to show you that if you know what Lectora is looking for in the results, or how it's storing that information, then you can do some really creative things with your questions. Now I've talked about results a little bit here. The next thing I want to do is tell you that in order to sort of show you this, I actually put this entire presentation inside of a test. So let's go ahead and take a look at the test results. Here are the test results here. I passed. And you can see, here's the matching question. We removed the pot. We matched the pot to the spaghetti. We matched the skillet with the meatballs. We matched the roasting pan to the turkey. So much better than the old days where it said 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3. On this next question, the compass one, you see we got it correct. We moved the southwest northeast compass to the drop zone, which in this case we just called 1. And we did not move either of the other 3 distractor items. I'm not going to go through all of these. You get the idea here. But what I want to point out, you notice these slashes. There are a lot of slashes in here, like fact3 slash. All through here you'll see a number of slashes. So what I want to do is I want to talk real quick about why are there slashes in the results. Let me just move this out of the way. The reason that there's slashes in the results is, remember, things can now be correct in more than one drop zone. So when we tell you what the correct answer is, Lectora has to say, this is correct in this drop zone, or this drop zone, or this drop zone, etc. Now, this particular question had a lot of drop zones, so it's really cluttered looking, and I apologize for that. But all this is saying is, we dragged the trends are not important to the fiction 1 column, but also correct would have been trends are not important in the fiction 2 column, or the fiction 3 column, or the fiction 4 column, or the fiction 5 column. That's why there's slashes in the results. So that's all it's saying is, this is acceptable as well as these others. That's important. That's more important when you get things wrong, actually, because it'll tell the student, here's what you answered, and here's a good example. Here's what you answered, and here's what the correct answer was. So the correct answer was product quality is not important in fiction 1, or product quality is not important in fiction 2, etc. So that's why there's slashes. So now that we've talked about all these things, what I want to do is I want to open up Lectora and then just show you this in the actual Lectora file. Okay, here's our first. That was just the basic matching question. And I'll open this up here and you can see nothing too complicated here at all. Again, we have our question text. We have the images that we selected. And we named each one appropriately. So what Lectora is looking for in the results is pot and spaghetti and skillet and meatballs and roasting pan and turkey. Again, if we wanted to add distractor items, we could add as many as we want and just indicate if they're left column or right column items. In this case, again, we don't need any, so we'll just go ahead and get rid of them. And you can name them as well. That's all it is. In this case, we had feedback of changing our character pose. So we put a character pose on the page, and then as feedback, we just ran actions to change the character pose to happy if they got it right, and to sad if they didn't get it right. So nothing really tricky there. And I think you understand now how to do this. Again, we can change the color of the lines if we want to. We can make them thicker, however we want to style it to make it look nice in our title. The next one I want to show is the drop point distractor one. This is the one that, remember, was clickable after they finished answering the question. So let's open that up and take a look in here. Okay, so the first thing I want to point out, I've got this group, you'll notice, that has 5 statements. All those are the things that show up when you click these. So that's no big thing there. And then here's our question. Now remember I said to think like a student, right? So even though we want them to drag the cost of feeding into the fact 1 drop zone, it really could be correct in any of the fact drop zones. So that's what we've said here. The cost of feeding, that's what we called it, is correct in fact 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And all the others are correct in fiction 1 through 5. So all of these are correct in fiction 1 through 5. Again, we could open up our expander if we needed to, move things around, resize them if we need to, whatever. In this particular case, we have snap to center. So really, if we wanted to, we could make this about this size, turn on snap to center, and it would still come out looking about the same. So don't be overwhelmed by that at all. Just cancel that. All right, so that's how this is set up. Remember, all of these are correct in fiction. This is correct in any of the facts. Let me show you how I did that clicking part to get that additional information. So here's my submit button. You'll notice when I enter the page, first of all, I have this, I have a submit variable that I created, and I just set it equal to 0. When they click the submit button, I change the value of that to 1 if the question contains all the left item names, dash, and some right item thing, some drop zone name. I just use -F because fact and fiction both start with F, and it doesn't matter which one they are. So as long as our question has the cost of feeding is in something, the administrator at the facility is in something, you will spend less time is in something, and so on. As long as all of those are true, then we're going to change our variable value to 1. Once it's 1, here on my question, each of these question choices has an action that says, show the right statement, but only do it if my value is equal to 1. So that's all. We know it won't click then until they've put them all in some place. That's how that works. So by knowing what's in the variable, we can do a number of things. We can determine if it's incomplete or incorrect. So here it's just incomplete because it does not contain all of these things somewhere. Right? We know what the variable is looking for, what Lectora is looking for. Here, incorrect, it contains all of those things somewhere, and the question wasn't right. So we can offer different feedback because we know what was happening inside Lectora. Let's look at another example. Let's look at the example of using a drag and drop just for instructional purposes. Again, nothing magical here. Here are all the text blocks that show up. Okay. Here's our drag and drop question. Again, since we're not really treating it as a question, it doesn't matter what's correct or incorrect. But we've got one drop zone, it's the tabletop. And then we've got our bowl, image, pot, skillet, wok, all those images, and the item names that correspond with them. Our feedback for both of them is just to run an action group. So nothing special there. I'll talk about that in a second. So anyway, what we're looking for, we know the result Lectora is going to see is bowl-table or pot-table or skillet-table, etc. Remember, it's looking for the item name dash drop zone name. So since we know that's the case, all we're doing when we process the question is running the action group that says show feedback. The action group show feedback says show the mixing bowl feedback if the question contains bowl on the table. Show the wok feedback if the question contains wok on the table. And so on for the roasting pan and the baking sheet, the pot, etc. Okay, so that's all that's doing there. Nothing different from the question perspective. It's just that as feedback, we said run an action group, and the action group determines what shows up because we know what Lectora's looking for in the results. Let's take a look at the teller scenario. Again, nothing fancy here at all. Basic drag and drop question. We've got one drag item, it's the check image, which we named check, and we've got all these drop zones, one for the let's just do this. One for the micro reader, one for the printer, the customer, the document bins, the number pad, the keyboard, and the monitor. And every time they drag this check image to something, the results see check micro, check printer, check number pad, whatever, wherever they drop it. And all we're doing is running feedback that says, if it's in the right place, show the little video and the message. That's all. And again, you can see the results here, the check-miker. And finally, let's take a look at that farmer's market example. This one's a little more complex, and you might not want to jump into this right away until you really understand that left item name or drag item name dash drop zone name. But here's our drag and drop question. Nothing really fancy about that at all. Again, we've got these 10 drag items, the 3 labels, and then all of the images for the eggs and the tomatoes and the cantaloupe. As I said, I did not name them in this case because it was easy for me to use the numbers, but you might want to name them egg label, tomato label, cantaloupe label, brown egg horizontal, brown egg diagonal, white egg horizontal, etc., etc. And then we have our 6 drop zones, the label drop zones and the actual buckets or basket drop zones. Okay. What we did here, I don't think there's any feedback on this. Yeah, there's no feedback on this because we wrote our own. And what we did, when they click the submit button, what we do is we look to see where the labels are located, where the eggs, the tomatoes, and the cantaloupe were placed. Well, and then we run the appropriate scenario. So we have these action groups here. This is the egg, tomato, cantaloupe. In other words, eggs, tomato, cantaloupe group. We have the egg, cantaloupe, tomato group, and so on. How do we know which one to look at? Well, we run this action group if they put 1 in 1. In other words, they put the egg label in label position 1, the tomato label in position 2, that's down here, and the cantaloupe in position 3. Again, I didn't name these, but that's what they would be had I named them. So that if that's the case, then we know to look in this action group and check to make sure then that all the eggs are in the right place. Because if it's running this one, all the eggs have to be in bucket number 4. So that's all we're checking here. Is the first egg in position 4 in bucket 4, second egg, third egg, and fourth egg all in bucket 4. If the eggs was placed over here, then all the eggs would have to be in bucket 5. If the egg label was placed here, all the eggs would have to be in bucket 6. So that's all we're doing because we know what Lectora is looking for. We're able to do something a little bit more creative with our questions. And that takes me to the end of today's presentation. I hope you're inspired to try something new, to play around a little bit with drag and drop and matching questions. Again, now that you know what it's looking for in the results, you can do some pretty creative things.